The heavy wooden doors of the county courthouse creaked open that morning, letting in a stream of pale sunlight and the quiet shuffle of footsteps. The place smelled of dust and old paper, its marble floors echoing under the weight of people gathering for another routine day of trials. No one expected history to unfold in that worn-out courtroom, not the clerks, not the spectators, and certainly not the officers who stood whispering near the back. Among those who entered was Leonard Briggs, a tall black man in a modest gray suit. His tie was slightly crooked, his face unreadable, his posture steady but humble. To most, he looked like just another defendant, a nobody. That was exactly what the officers thought as they traded smirks and snide remarks from the back row. One of them chuckled audibly, shaking his head as if Leonard's very presence was a joke. The judge, an aging man with thinning hair and heavy glasses, adjusted his robe as he sat at the bench. He glanced at the case file before him, just a few sheets of paper stapled together, and read the name aloud. Leonard Briggs. His voice carried no weight, just routine. But for Leonard, that moment was the start of something much bigger than routine. The prosecutor, a young woman with sharp eyes and a voice that dripped with arrogance, rose to her feet. She looked at Leonard like he was already guilty, like she had seen 100 men just like him before. Her tone was dismissive as she began listing the charges: resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, reckless driving. The officers behind her grinned knowingly, as if the words were weapons they themselves had loaded. Leonard did not flinch. He stood quietly, hands folded in front of him, letting her words wash over the room. His silence only seemed to amuse the officers more. One leaned over and whispered something to the other, who laughed loud enough that the bailiff shot him a warning glance. Still, the smirk never left his face, but then something shifted. When it was Leonard's turn to speak, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He didn't even argue. Instead, with deliberate calm, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed a badge on the judge's bench. The silver emblem caught the light, its engraved letters gleaming clear enough for the entire courtroom to see. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Director of Internal Affairs. The room froze. The judge blinked, leaned forward, and adjusted his glasses as though his eyes had deceived him. The prosecutor faltered mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. And the two officers, those same men who had dragged Leonard out of his car and mocked him, went pale as if the blood had drained from their faces. This was no ordinary defendant. This was the man who oversaw federal investigations into police misconduct. The very person who could decide whether officers kept their badges or lost everything. The silence was suffocating. Leonard finally spoke, his voice steady, carrying not anger but authority. "Before we continue," he said, looking directly at the judge, "I suggest the record reflect who I am and why I'm here." The judge stammered, flipping through the file again as if searching for some missed clue. But the truth was already before him. The badge wasn't just proof of Leonard's identity. It was a warning, a revelation that the entire proceeding was about to turn upside down. And as the courtroom sat in stunned silence, Leonard's mind drifted back to the night that had brought him here. A lonely stretch of highway, flashing red and blue lights, and the cruel laughter of men who thought they could treat him like he was nothing. The memory came back in sharp fragments, like shards of glass cutting through Leonard's thoughts. A lonely highway, a set of flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. He had pulled over calmly, rolled down his window, and placed both hands on the steering wheel, every careful move drilled into him. After years of witnessing how quickly such encounters could turn deadly, two officers approached, their flashlights cutting across his face. "License and registration," one barked, his tone already laced with hostility. Leonard complied without hesitation. Still, the officer yanked open his door. "You didn't signal when you changed lanes," the second officer sneered. Leonard blinked. "With respect, I did. But if you'd like to," he never finished the sentence. A rough hand gripped his arm, dragging him out of the car. His cheek hit cold gravel as a knee pressed hard into his back. The accusation shifted. Now it was resisting arrest. Then disorderly conduct. Then whatever else they thought would stick. They laughed while writing the report, their pens scratching lies onto paper. To them, Leonard was just another man who would be too afraid to fight back, too powerless to matter. But Leonard wasn't powerless. He had let them play their game, even allowed the charade to unfold. Because he knew sooner or later truth would weigh heavier than their cruelty. And now, in this courtroom, truth had arrived. The clerk confirmed the badge's authenticity with Washington, D.C. within minutes. The judge's face went pale as the reality set in. The prosecutor stumbled over her own notes, suddenly unsure how to proceed. And the officers, their arrogance evaporated. Sweat rolled down their temples as Leonard turned his gaze upon them. "This isn't about me," Leonard said, his calm voice carrying through the hushed room. "It's about every person who couldn't defend themselves. Every person you treated like they didn't matter. I had a badge. Most people don't." The judge swallowed hard. With one stroke of his gavel, the charges against Leonard were dismissed. But it didn't end there. Leonard formally requested the officers be placed on immediate leave pending federal investigation. His words were not a request. They were a command. By the end of the week, Internal Affairs launched a full probe. Old complaints resurfaced, body cam malfunctions were exposed, and witnesses who had been ignored finally had their chance to be heard. The department that once laughed at Leonard now stood in the harsh light of accountability. The officers who mocked him faced not only suspension, but the possibility of prison. The prosecutor resigned before her career could be swallowed by the scandal. And the judge. The judge would never again take a name on a file at face value. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Leonard didn't stop for them. He simply walked past, the morning light catching his badge for a brief second before he slipped it back into his jacket. His face remained calm, unreadable, because this victory wasn't for him. It was for the countless others who had been silenced. For those who never had the power to speak in the first place. And as Leonard Briggs disappeared into the crowd, one truth lingered in the air. Sometimes, the quietest man in the room carries the most power.